Hey, Blythewood. I was super excited when David reached out about possibly preaching this morning. My only regret is that I can't do it live with you. I think you all meet via Zoom, and I wish that I could see your faces. I wish that I could catch up with you, smile, laugh, share stories, see how you are. The current church I work at is we meet at the exact same time as you all do, and it's just two of us on staff, and we're both part-time. So we try not to take off too often unless it's for a planned vacation or an emergency. But know that I miss you all. I think about my time in Toronto and with y'all often, and the incredible hospitality you all offered me. Really, the experience was truthfully one of the most formative times of my life, and I always look back on it with good thoughts. So I miss being there, and hopefully once COVID isn't a thing, if I can take off some way and get there relatively cheap, I would love to come visit. But anyways, our scripture this morning comes from Mark 5. It is verses 1 through 20. It's a lot of scripture, so bear with me. I'll try to read it semi-quickly, but it's 20 verses, so just bear with me. But I think it has some really, really good stuff for us to talk about. So Mark chapter 5. They came to the other side of the sea, meaning Jesus and the disciples, to the country of the Gerasenes. And when Jesus, had stepped out of the boat, immediately a man out of the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. He lived among the tombs, and no one could restrain him anymore, even with a chain. For he had often been restrained with shackles and chains, but the chains he wrenched apart, and the shackles he broke in pieces, and no one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always howling and bruising himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and bowed down before him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he had said to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And Jesus asked him, "What's your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." He begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. And now, there on the hillside, a great herd of pigs, were feeding. And the unclean spirits begged him, "Send us into the swine, let us enter them." So he gave them permission. And the unclean spirits came out and entered the swine, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep of the bank into the sea and were drowned. The swineherds ran off and told it in the city and in the country, and then people came to see what it was that happened. They came to Jesus and saw this demoniac sitting there, clothed and in his right mind. The very man who had the legion was in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen what happened reported it, and then they began to beg Jesus to leave their neighborhood. And as he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed by the demons begged him that he might stay with him. But Jesus refused, saying, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and what mercy he has shown you." He went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him. And everyone was amazed. So demons, this is fun to talk about. The truth is that it's really hard for us to decipher what we're supposed to do with these passages that talk about demons. Many people argue that it was just a different way of understanding mental disorders or that nature. Some other people argue that demons used to be a thing, but no longer are. And there are many others who say demons were never real, and it just makes a good story. And still others who think that demons are still real in this same way today, but may manifest other ways as well. There's no real way for us to know what to do with the demons. So what are we supposed to do with this story in Mark 5? I think beginning with a bigger picture and background of Mark as a book, as a gospel, will shed some light on this. Mark's the shortest gospel. It's also likely the first one written. Those go hand in hand because, remember, these started out as oral traditions. And people thought at this point that Jesus was going to be coming back any day. We know a couple thousand years later, didn't happen. But these people thought it was going to happen. So the oral tradition, they're trying to tell people like the nuts and bolts, what they need to know. So Mark is the earliest written. So it's choppy. It's missing details that other gospels have because they now know, oh, maybe it's not happening right now, right? So Mark is choppy, it's short. It also has a really important and huge emphasis on fear. It's highlighted all throughout the book of Mark. Fear, fear, fear here. People are afraid here. Demons are afraid here. Throughout the whole book, fear is a huge emphasis. This is illustrated especially in the ending of Mark. I want us just to jump here real quick. Mark 16 is the last chapter in Mark. In most of our Bibles, it goes through verse 20. But verse 20 wasn't the original ending of Mark. It's agreed upon by most New Testament scholars that Mark ends at verse 8. In my Bible, it's bracketed off. Some places just have asterisks. My Bible actually has an additional shorter ending of Mark past verse 8, and then an additional longer ending of Mark, which is verses 9 through 20. But the original ending of Mark, verse 8, is really important. Right? Jesus had just died. The women were at the tomb doing proper burial rituals. And then someone appeared to them and said, go, Jesus is not here. He's been raised. Go, tell the disciples. It's a really abrupt ending, but listen to what they do. They went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. The original ending of Mark ends with those words. They were afraid. They were so afraid. Matthew's version of the ending, right, of this exact story is that they had fear and joy, but they run and go tell the disciples. In the Gospel of Luke, they tell the disciples. In John, we're told that Mary Magdalene announced the good news to the disciples. But in Mark, it's different. The original ending of Mark says they didn't tell anybody. They were afraid. Why is Mark different? Why am I sharing this? And it's not just because it's fascinating to me, although it truthfully is. But I think it shows that the hearers of Mark, again, an oral tradition, the hearers of Mark would have heard this as a challenge. And the challenge would be, will you have fear? Will you be afraid and tell no one and do nothing? Or will you have faith? That's the challenge in all of the book of Mark. So when fear shows up in a story in Mark, we really got to pay attention. And it shows up constantly in our stories. In this story today, in Mark 5, 1 through 20, it shows up constantly. So the question I want to ask, the questions are, how is fear manifested in this story? Where does it come from? And then what's the result of it? What happens because people live into their fear? I'm going to give a quick synopsis of our story again, since we just took a little detour to the ending of Mark. And I want to point out where the fear is. So Jesus and the disciples cross the sea. They get out. This man comes out of the tomb. We're told he's crazy, demon-possessed. People have literally shackled him. You don't shackle somebody if you aren't afraid of them. So already fear is popping up. This man comes to Jesus, and Jesus and the demons have a little conversation. They're clearly afraid of Jesus. They beg him, don't just send us out. Give us to the swine, the pigs. So Jesus lets them. And it's 2,000 pigs. That's crazy. The owner of these pigs saw what happened, and they told people. And everyone came and saw that this demon-possessed man was in his right mind. And how did they react to that? You guessed it. They were afraid. They weren't excited for the man. They weren't like, oh my goodness, we are free from this. This man is well. No, they were afraid. And they begged Jesus to leave because of it. In contrast to that fear, this healed man begged Jesus to stay with him. And Jesus said, no, go tell people. And the man did. So where's fear in this story? How's it manifested? What's the result? Well, the result of people living into their fear, it sounds really cliche. I almost didn't want to say it, but I'm going to say it. They miss Jesus, right? They miss Jesus because they're afraid. They're missing the way of Jesus, the gift, the way that Jesus wants us to live. They miss it completely because they're afraid. They just want Jesus to leave. One commentator puts it, they are echoing the cry of the unclean spirits. These characters, these townspeople, are saying they're a mirror of these unclean spirits. And we know that the unclean spirits are not a positive character here. When I was prepping for this sermon, I was reminded of something that I chose to do on the summer that I was in Toronto, interning with you all. And the way that fear played a role in it and responsibility played a role in it. So I didn't have a car, obviously, when I interned. So I learned public transportation really well. It's honestly an impressive system. I know that there are a lot of people in Toronto that complain about it, but truthfully, it's more impressive than any other system that I've used. I got everywhere that I wanted to. So there was this one day that I was coming back from work. I was reading a book on the subway. This person sat down next to me and they smelled bad. They looked like they were clearly high on something. They didn't look okay. This person started falling asleep more and more, and eventually head straight onto my shoulder. Like, nudge him off, like, get off of me. Head goes straight back down. Didn't budge at all, just goes straight back down. So I get up and I move. I'm like, I'm not dealing with this. I'm annoyed at how rude this person's being. When I get up, that person just completely slumped down into the seat, just slumped down, shoulder, head hit the seat, doesn't even move. A stop happens right after that. And somebody goes and sees this person and notices he's not okay. Instead of just walking away like I did, they do the right thing. They go and check on him, kind of give him a little shake. Doesn't move at all. Really shake him, doesn't move at all. Goes and pulls the emergency thing and goes and tries to attend to this person to help him. Police come, paramedics come. This person is not okay. All right, they eventually get him to come to, and he's in a complete daze. He was okay, thankfully. But I was sitting there, I was annoyed because he was leaning on me. I was annoyed because he was taking too long, like this whole thing was taking too long, and I wanted to go back and eat. This dude had passed out because of whatever was in his system. He was in danger, legitimate danger. He needed medical attention. And all I did was get out of the way. I ostracized this person, much like in our story, they ostracized this demoniac. Right? I ostracized him because it was inconvenient. I didn't want to engage fully with the situation. There was a fear of that responsibility. This Jesus way of life that's illustrated in this story is disrupting society. It's disrupting their comforts. We put up social structures that alienate ourselves from others or others from ourselves because we can be more comfortable. Because we're afraid of what fully engaging people really means, of taking that responsibility. It's easier just to be small. It's easier not to care. At least for me, it can be. There's this movie I really like called Coach Carter. It's based on a true story about a basketball team and their coach. He's super strict, but he's challenging them to be better people and players. There's a really pivotal scene where they're killing it in the season, winning all their games, But the coach finds out that they're doing terribly academically. So he suspends the season for them until they get their grades up. He's like, no, we will not play until we get our grades up. Now, the school is like, no, we're not dealing with that. The school decides we will fire you unless you are okay with starting the season back. And it's in this pivotal moment in the story, the coach decides to stick to his guns. He says, I'll resign. We're doing this my way. We will not do this. If our people cannot succeed academically, there's no point. And he walks out on the court one more time just to say goodbye to it. And his team is sitting there in desks. And they're like, no, coach, we're with you. We will not play until we get our grades up as well. There's one player who stands up. There's this interaction throughout the movie where the coach would always ask him what his deepest fear was. It happened repeatedly. And in this turning point in the movie, the player finally has an answer. And he says this: our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We were all meant to shine as children do. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. And as we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. Today, I want to acknowledge that fear is not always a bad thing, right? We need fear. It keeps us safe, away from harm. There's help in fear. But this version of fear, being afraid of the responsibility, being scared to fully engage with the world because of what that brings, that type of fear is not positive. We do things often without knowing, like putting up social barriers because it benefits us. It makes us comfortable. It makes us feel okay. We definitely do this with our faith too. But the real message of Jesus, the way of Jesus, is unsettling. It forces us to be fully engaged with the world and ourselves. It's like this light and goodness that comes from that, right? Like when we don't let fear hold us back from that, when we decide we want to take responsibility and not be like the townspeople, but be like this healed man, that's worth it. That process and what comes from it is always worth it. That quote from Coach Carter, it's actually an adapted quote from Marianne Williamson. And I want to end with her version. It's a little more spiritual and fun, and really it's just good for anyone to hear. So if you don't take anything else away, hear these words. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, to be gorgeous, to be talented, to be fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There's nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people will not feel insecure around you. We're all meant to shine, as children do. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. And it's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our light shine, we unconsciously give others permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. So the challenge today is the challenge that the hearers of Mark would have heard at the end. Will you choose fear or will you choose faith? Will you be like the townspeople Or will you be like the liberated and healed man? Will you take up that responsibility? Amen.